Hello and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. Today on this mini-sode, we are going to be talking about C.J. Leeds' Maeve Fly novel. I believe this is her debut novel. This is published by Tor Nightfire, and it was published June 6, 2023. I've been waiting for this book. It's been like weeks and weeks and weeks out. So finally I received it. So at first, of course, as you can probably see, the cover of this novel is pretty wild. I was like, this looks like a trip. It looks creepy. It looks like body horror. I was all over it. So not only that, but we have this summary that really drew me in. So here's what it was. By day, Maeve Fly works at the happiest place in the world as every child's favorite ice princess. We could probably guess. By the neon glow of the Sunset Strip, Maeve haunts the dive bars with a drink in one hand and a book in the other, imitating her misanthropic literary heroes. But that is until Gideon Green, her best friend's brother, comes to town. He awakens something really dark and really dangerous inside of her, and the world that she once knew suddenly shifts beneath her feet. She's now untethered. Maeve ditches her discontented act and tries on a whole new persona. This is a bloodier and bolder one, similar to like Patrick Bateman of American Psycho. So of course, I had to pick this up. I was like, okay, well, who doesn't love American Psycho? Patrick Bateman. That is the summary of Maeve Fly, but let's talk about C.J. Leeds first. Like I said, I'm pretty sure this is her debut novel. She's got a few other books that are going to be published by Tor, I think this year. Very impressive. She's a horror author. She has a master's in creative writing. She took classes in like mythology and Middle Age history for her undergrad. It's pretty cool that she did that, but I didn't see any of that in this book. She likes to hike. She's a Trekkie. She sounds cool. I'm down for C.J. Leeds. Not only that, her writing style is fun. It's approachable. It's definitely has a lot of like Chuck Palahniuk vibes. It's very gritty, punk, in your face, shameless. It's pretty and brutal. It's brutal. So let me talk to you about my thoughts on this novel. I give it about a 3.5, almost a 4. There are a few things that bothered me with this novel, and we'll go over that in a second. Let's talk about our main character. So a lot of people have said over on like Goodreads or other reviews that they weren't really sure what the point of this novel is. It's about Maeve Fly. It doesn't have to have like some big purpose. In fact, it kind of talks about this in the very beginning of the book, but maybe because there's so much crap going on that it's easy to forget. One beautiful thing and really amazing intro in the, it seriously is so good in this book, is that it talks about how we like to, we're obsessed as a culture with, monsters, or why serial killers became serial killers. We always want these answers. We have these questions like, how did these people become the way they are? And in the very beginning, the narrator specifically says that we do want all of these answers, but there doesn't have to be like this tragic backstory. People don't need to be victims to perpetrate these horrible acts on other people and be terrible. People don't have to have a reason to just be monsters. And she talks about, this is her story, Maeve's story. It's uncontrollable. It is what it is. Take it or leave it. That is the story. It's really upfront and in your face. This is a story about a girl named Maeve Fly who kind of goes a little fucking nuts. Sorry for the swearing. Anyway, so in the very beginning, we get insights into Maeve's life. So, like I said in the summary, she works at the happiest place in the world in Anaheim. And she works as the favorite ice princess. Granted, none of these things are actually named except for Anaheim. I thought that was interesting. I was like, this must be a trademarking thing. Anyway, so she works as everybody's favorite princess, and One thing I thought was interesting is she really loves her job. She talks about it all the time. It's one of her favorite things. She loves making kids happy and seeing people light up anytime they see their favorite ice princess. It's kind of wholesome and cute. But then we have a different kind of Maeve, a dark Maeve, a Maeve that she doesn't really show to a lot of people, and that does include her best friend Kate. There are glimpses of it, but not entirely. There's we see Kate as almost like a mirror for Maeve. And I wish we got a little more into Kate, but it makes sense because this is literally a story about Maeve's slippery slope into psychosis. Maeve lives with her grandmother, who's actually in a hospice. Maeve's grandmother used to be this rock star Hollywood pinnacle, actress at one point. And now she's not even really awake. Maeve has to take care of her through the day, and she goes to work, goes out at night, does her crazy stuff, comes home. They live in this mansion on the hill, and her grandmother's there, but not really. So an interesting feature about Maeve as a character is that in a way, she is almost presented as some sort of feminist protagonist, I guess if you could say that. But that actually proves to not be the case as we progress through the novel. We're talking about a character that is, actually in the beginning up front says that men are stupid, right? And how men in particular take advantage of women. Other quotes, for instance, how society will actually expect violent acts to be by men, but then when it's a woman who commits violent acts, all hands are up, like, no way, we're all like freaking out and we're obsessed. Oh, it's a woman. So it's interesting because we have this jargon that is very associated with being very feminist, but Maeve commits these very atrocious, violent acts on women in particular. Like, she's actually more brutal towards women than men in this story. It's messed up because she acknowledges the violence towards women and how fucked up it is, but then she goes and does those things. So Maeve is a contradiction in herself. You can kind of see a lot of that in this novel, which is fun. Again, another Patrick Bateman thing. It's a very erotic novel, and it's also a very dark and grotesque novel. Just the things that she thinks about, kind of like how Patrick Bateman, as we go through American Psycho, it gets a little more and more messed up. Just the things that they're thinking to themselves. So Maeve does the exact same thing when she's looking at other people and she's got this, vision of the, how these other people are. Even though it's not as blatantly dark in the very beginning, we do see it. And then Gideon comes into the picture and things get way more twisted and gruesome. So by the way, trigger warning, now we're going to get into some of the big stuff. And I just wanted to let you know, this book is very visceral. It talks about things like sexual assault. There's a lot of body horror. There is a lot of acts of violence. It's brutal. It's bloody, gory. And there's torture, murder. There's a lot of very, very dark themes in this novel. And we're going to be touching on some of that. Just a forewarning. Not only that, I want to issue a spoiler warning too. There are a few things I want to touch on that might be a little spoilery. So if you don't want to be spoiled, pick up Maevefly if you're looking for a really, really spooky book, especially before the Halloween season, because this book does take place around Halloween time, which happens to be Maeve's favorite holiday. Anyway, that's a little bit of a sidebar. So Gideon walks into the picture and everything starts to kind of spiral out of control. Maeve is trying her very best not to feel an attraction to Gideon, but she does. And it's interesting because, again, even though this story is about Maeve, I think in some ways it should also be about Gideon. And I will bring this back around, and I think it is a lot about Gideon, but it's not as blatant as it seems. I saw a theory online and I actually really love it. We're going to talk about it eventually. So this is the part of the novel when Gideon enters where this book starts to get extra dark. You know, we had a level of darkness where we're like, okay, we all have like bits of darkness in ourselves, and we get to see that with Maeve. Then we enter, it's like we cross a barrier and we go into the deepest depths of just the human consciousness that is almost like a Patrick Bateman thing. That's why American Psycho is so great, is because I think a lot of us could feel or at least relate to some aspects of Patrick Bateman. Oh, wait, is that just me? Don't worry, I'm not Patrick Bateman. Anyway, so Maeve dives deeper into those very primal, dark feelings. The more, and in a way, it seems like she's trying to justify her darkness to Gideon. So again, Gideon, in a way, is acting as Maeve's mirror. It's also, in a way, she's testing herself, seeing how much approval she's getting from Gideon, from the actions she's taking, which is a very interesting study in itself. The beginning of the novel for me was a bit slower. There were parts I really enjoyed diving into her psyche, but again, I did feel like it slogged sometimes. When we started to pick up after Gideon, I felt like I had to devour the book. It was so hard to actually put it down because there was just so much gruesome stuff happening that you're just like, are you freaking serious right now? I have to finish this because what is going on? But the issue with that too is there were a few times where I felt like Maeve and how she was written was a little too edgy, and just a lot of it had a lot of shock factor. Again, I've said this before, there is a place for the shock value in horror, but in this way, I just felt like it was actually kind of torture porn. It was a lot, you know, and I'm not really sure how that added to her character, because the only reason why I say this is there's a few scenes where it's a very long and drawn out process. There's a scene in particular, I'm not going to ruin anything here, but there's a scene with a curling iron, and the whole thing takes place for a couple of pages. It's a lot to take in, and it's really just, it's gross. But then as Maeve starts to descend further into her deep, dark, sinister places, the scenes feel snappier. So like it's not as so for me, torture is like this long, arduous, horrible experience, right? And then towards the end, it just feels like everything is just flying off. Like, you know, it's not really torture, it's just like bloop, we're done. Okay, we're done. You're done. You are actually done. And it's zippier and quicker. So it just feels like we only get a few glimpses of this like very horrible thing that doesn't really add to her character, because towards the end she's just ready to be done with a few things. You know, it just it's almost like a different kind of character, and they both might be dark, but not quite in the same way. It takes away from some of that. So that's why I think some of that was more for shock value, and it wasn't really jiving with me. To be honest, those are really my biggest cons, is like some of the shock value. I'm not a huge fan of Maeve in general. Like in the beginning, I felt like, oh, I could probably relate a little bit to this, maybe. But then for a while, I'm like, this is almost a little too much, and she's a little too edgelordy. And then another part is the pacing of the novel shifts quite a bit, and it feels less of like a psychological deep dive and becomes more of a gore fest. So I was kind of hoping for more of that psychological scary bit in there, but it was still fun. So the thing with Gideon, which was really interesting, at the very, very end, he talks about how he's like her too. And there's this theory that I read over on Reddit that was basically saying that Gideon might have been stalking Maeve to be one of his victims in some regard, and harassing her with all the doll stuff. So we have an interesting juxtaposition there where we've got Maeve's perspective and how she is acting, what her darker self is, versus like Gideon's, but Gideon's is definitely more in the shadows, not as blatant. and definitely more psychological. So I will put that Reddit post in the show notes, so go check that out. I thought it was really interesting because the end I felt like was very abrupt, and I was very, I don't know, I wasn't really confused, but I felt dissatisfied. But that Reddit comment about Gideon in particular made this book, I rounded up to around a 4. It's definitely a high 3.5 if we have to go in 0.5 increments. So definitely look at that. I would say the one thing I really enjoyed the most about this novel is CJ Leeds' voice. The whole narration was great. I felt like the character, even though I don't like Maeve, was spunky. It was fun. It was individual. Even if she's like a super edgelord, it was still an exciting read. So if you're looking for a really gory, dark, violent, erotic book, especially for Halloween, I thought the setting and the atmosphere was great. I personally felt like it was kind of believable. There was a few things where I was like, no. But it was a really interesting book. Great to get ready for the spooky season. Check out Mayfly. I give it a 3.5, but I'm also pretty morbid. Again, trigger warning. There's a lot of them, so please be careful. And make sure to keep an eye out for all the other novels that CJ Leeds is going to be putting out, hopefully, within this year. Make sure to tune in every Wednesday and Friday for new episodes. We will probably be doing some Mondays as well because the spooky season is coming up. There's a ton of books coming out in September and October. So be prepared. It's going to be awesome. And make sure to spread the word to your spooky friends, family about Dark Side of the Library. It really helps us out. You can find us on our socials at Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Dark Side of the Library. Join us for our Hocus Pocus cooking group that we're going to be doing. We have a whole Facebook group for that. So if you like cooking Halloween stuff for a whole month, give us a follow there, and join us on our Amazon Live channel at amazon.com/live/Dark Side of the Library. Thanks so much for watching. Have a creeptastic week. See you next time.